Brennan Lee Mulligan is one of the greatest DMs in the world, hands down, and no questions asked. And a lot of us know that from Dimension 20, but baby, if you're not listening to Worlds Beyond Number and hearing him play with Abria, Lou Wilson, and Erika Ishii, you are missing out. Let's talk about the most recent episode of Worlds Beyond Number. I believe it's called The Conclave of the Witches of the Coven of Elders. Super long title. There are spoilers in this for that episode, but this is also good, even if you aren't listening to it, because it's Brennan in his wheelhouse, where he's using his world description and his overwhelming, awe-inspiring moments and using it through NPC vibe description, which is one of his absolute strengths. So let's jump into it. If you like this video, you like discussions about Dimension 20, Worlds Beyond Number, TTRPGs in general, you know, do the things with the likes and the subscribes and stuff. Let's pop in. All right, so we're talking about this episode, and really what I like to do is, instead of recap the whole episode, I like talking about the part that really stood out to me, that was both really good in the episode and exciting to talk about, but also something that can give us all some education or some benefits as TTRPG players, TTRPG runners, even storytellers, writers, everything. So let's jump into that. Okay, so up to this point, we'd seen Indri, who's the Witch of the Wind and Stars. Up to this point, we'd seen Indri. Indri has been amazing, very tall, very beautiful, very Snow Queen inspired and everything. And we've seen this kind of castle at the top of the world in the North Pole, both the coldest place and the tallest place in the world. Very exciting. But in this episode, we got to see the rest of the Coven of Elders, which included, which of course includes Ame, but it includes Grimoire, Hekea, and Mirara. So Hekea is the Witch of the Woodland Green, Grimoire is the Witch of the Wild Hunt, and Mirara is the Witch of the Waning Moon, right? Of the Waning Moon. Why is this important? Because each of them got a shocking description. The way that Grimoire and Hekea are described as entering, with the wild beasts and the plants and the fairies and everything, and the blood and the making things blossom and the dead cold of snow and the smells and the overwhelming sense, and then of course the sound design behind it. But that wasn't at the table, where he was basically describing each character as if they were the most important NPC in the world. Now, in the fireside chat after that, he talked about this. Brennan Lee Mulligan explained, I can't see these witches as a group of 4 NPCs. These are each individual main characters within their own story. They are individual characters. And what that did was, it meant that this meeting time, because we'd already met Indri, we'd already met the Wind and Stars Witch and everything, we had 3 new NPCs, each more impressive and shocking than the last. Now, why is this so important? Is because the players cannot get their footing here. They can't get time to like suss out things. Indri they got time with, but now with Hekea, Grimoire, and Mirara, they have no time to like really suss them out between each other. It's like full elements, primal forces, and they are. They're like, it's basically plants, beasts, and deaths, and then stars and sky, and then Ame's the heart. And all of these witches come in so big and so impressive, even though like Hekea really doesn't do anything herself other than some subtle status play, but just the area that surrounded her. Think of that as the difference of how Ame came up, where Ame's just kind of walking by herself, trudging through the snow, just casually arriving, doesn't have a retinue and everything. Now, Mirara doesn't have a retinue. She has needles, crown of needles, like terrifying fingernails, a blank face mask, super terrifying, and she appears at the center where they're supposed to meet. So rather than a grand entry, she is just a force that is suddenly there, right? And that in itself is a different kind of threat. But by having both the Woodland Green and the Wild Hunt kind of show up together, one an elderly lady, another a very powerful, very in their prime sort of figure, both of those things, they're opposite of each other. They balance each other, but they both come in so aggressively, with the one child on the Grimoire's shoulder eating the heart, right? It's so good because, again, what they're doing is they're not giving you, it's not going to be a one-to-one, right? They're not warming up to a fight. This chapter isn't going to be about dealing with each of these witches in turn. It may become that, but they're like, you don't have to deal with them one-on-one. You have to deal with them all together. And you don't have to deal with them all together as if they're an organization with a leader. These are all arguably like main antagonist and or mentor level characters. These are Vaders to Obi-Wans. These are Gandalfs to Sarumans, right? Like, they're not minor things. Imagine, if you will, if you were watching, say, Star Wars, right? Which I used earlier as an example. And instead of in the Star Wars story, you met Vader by himself as this force of nature, and then eventually you discovered there was an emperor behind him, and then eventually you discover that there's like other generals, like via Clone Wars, that are a threat, and then eventually you discover Thrawn. What if they all showed up in the room at the same time? Right? That's the vibe that Brennan was going for, and he killed it. It's such an enthusiastic thing. Now, it takes more prep. It takes more time to consider that. But what it also does is it really sets the tone. Our players are level 3 characters. They're not going to pop off and strong-arm their way out of this. They've got to be clever. They're going to have to play this game and figure out their solutions out of this situation. They may have to run away. We're going to find out in the subsequent episodes. But what it means is there's an overwhelming sense of not only danger, but awe, right? Because now, even though we've already been in this castle, and this castle's already given us so much awe-inspiring moments, now it's the NPCs and their sheer presence, right? It means every time that they return to Mirara talking, or Grimoire, or Hakea, or Indri talking, they have all the weight of how strong and impressive their entrances were, how initially gut-punching their descriptions were, right? And that sets a tone for the play, and it sets a tone for the players. That wouldn't necessarily work on television, right? Okay, I'm going to apologize here. The audio was kind of destroyed and the video was real choppy, so some about the recording went off, and so I'm just going to continue this from here. I apologize for the audio differences. Nonetheless, that wouldn't work on television, right? So the reason that that wouldn't work on television is because the audience needs time to understand the characters that we introduce. And if you overwhelm them with so many factors, they're going to get confused. They're not going to remember names. But number one, actual play is a bit of a longer form. We're a bit more patient. It's a bit more like books, right? It's a bit more in a fashion where we're being fed the story and we can trust that we're going to have plenty of time with any given character for the story. The other thing that this works for uniquely in TTRPGs is similar to video games, where it sets up a whole bunch of points of interest, a whole bunch of potential paths one can go down. And if you go down certain paths, it closes other paths to you. Again, this isn't something you'd do in television or film because you'd have to spend all that money filming it and everything. But in an actual play, in a TTRPG session, or in a video game like Baldur's Gate 3, you make your choices and then you live with them. So maybe for some reason they never really get to understand the motivations behind someone like Mirara. She's always just an entity of existence and threat. But they stick with Hakea, right? They stick with Hakea because Hakea, for some reason, lines up with their needs. We don't know what's going to happen here, but it's a great example of being overwhelmed with a flood of information and a flood of potentiality, right? How can we use this as GMs? That's the important part. That's what I'm going to close on. So as GMs, we oftentimes think, how can we use this as GMs? That's the important part and what I'm going to close out with. So as GMs, oftentimes we have a lot of NPCs, right? We have a lot of story challenges, a lot of even maybe factions. But oftentimes we don't have factions that are all part of the same overall category, like these witches here. This coven is all part of the same category, built off the fact that one of the players wanted to play a witch. We've already experienced Grandmother Wren, and now Ame is the Witch of the World's Heart. And we've experienced Indri, and we're gonna experience these other witches. But they're all part of the same faction. But that doesn't mean that they don't have conflicting interests themselves, conflicting needs, goals, experiences, right? As Brennan said, these are all their own category. They are not a cadre of witches with a single representative and a single voice. They are individually grand and powerful people in their own right, with their own desires, motivations, histories, beliefs, etc. So what's interesting here when you're a GM and you're putting together something, whether it's a scene of a world, whether it's constant political intrigue, a lot of times that can get introduced in concepts like factions, systems, organizations, bodies of influence. But in this case, because of the nature of the narrative around here and the nature of the narrative that has been built in Worlds Beyond Number and The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, in the world of Amora, these witches are all extremely important, right? They are all a faction within themselves, which lets Brennan couch himself in his strength, which is NPC development. Brennan is an amazing NPC GM. He creates some memorable NPCs, great antagonists, great allies, great mentors, great goofs, right? He's very good at that. And so what he's done is taken that strength and broadened it to world building in a world that I might create, where I might have an organized crime, and then I have the government, and then I have a corrupt city guard, and then I have different warring factions, which Brennan has already implied with the conflicts between the Citadel and the government, and there's a war, and there's hedge mages, and there's different factions within that, and doublespeak. These witches, these beings of the elements of the world, are each their own standalone faction. They're the most important person in that category of faction, right? They'll have allies, they'll have representatives, they'll have polar bears or children that eat hearts, but they are the most important one. And to introduce that so soon and so early and in such impressive form and in such life and death stakes, ooh baby, is that delicious. It really sets a tone. The campaign could literally, at this point, just be about witches. It's not going to be, but it could just be about these witches. This could be introducing 4 villains that one must overcome, outwit, or gain onto their side. But that's not what's happening here, because it's too early on for that, and there's too much more worry. So it's so exciting because it makes the world feel fuller. It means that for all the things that are happening with the war, for all the things that are happening with Citadel, for all the things that are happening with Wild Ones, there's also these things happening with the witches. And they intersect or don't intersect as is necessary. And that's freaking awesome. Again, I'm sorry about the audio jump. I'm sorry about the still image for the end of this video, but I appreciate you sticking with me. If you like this, if you like Worlds Beyond Number, if you like Dimension 20 Talk, think about subscribing, liking, getting your notifications, whatever you like. I will continue posting here about it. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.